This is Our House presented by Samsung. Andy, Gareth, Ollie, and KJ still with you as we turn our attention now to the Canadian men's national team. Even though they have bowed out of this World Cup tournament, we are all about looking ahead, what's next for them, and should there be any possible changes? Let's discuss that. And Wheels, I'll come to you first, because in the immediate aftermath of the World Cup, do you think there should be significant changes, or do you think it's kind of best to stay with the status quo in the meantime?
I think you always need to be moving forward. If you're not moving forward, then you're moving back. That's just kind of the way that international football works. You always need to look ahead to what the new cycle may look like. And it's very cliche, it's very predictable, but it's time to give some younger players a chance. Jesse Marsch has been very loyal to his core group of players over the last 2 years, and you understand why. He had 2 years to get the team together as much as possible on the same page, figuring out who he trusts and who he didn't at that time to get the most out of this group at the World Cup. Now there's a 4-year gap between Canada and the biggest prize that they'll play for. Yes, there's competitions in between, but certainly you need to have an eye for the future. The one position I think that's exceptionally important for is the goalkeeping position. It's time to give Owen Goodman the gloves and move on from Crépeau, who's done very little wrong. I mean, let up one soft goal in the World Cup, and Dane Sinclair, because Goodman's very much the goalkeeper of the future. 22 now, 26 next time the World Cup rolls around. You need to see at the very least what you have in this young goalkeeper. He has a profile of being a very good one, but now's the time to flip the page, not 2 years from now. And I wrote down a lot of players who've been in and around the program who continue need to play an important part or need to grow and get more time with the team. DeFougerolles, Seagor, Knight LaBelle, who is on the outside looking in, Priso, who's still just 23. Marshall Ruddy is just 22. Saliba, Kone, Jeevan Badwell has shown that he should be part of the mix. Marcelo Flores when he recovers. Somehow Jesse Marsch needs to get on the same page as Daniel Jefferson, still 22 years of age. Very high ceiling up top for a team that's desperate for goals. Erobin Papel's certainly going to be in the mix, and Promise David is still just 24 years of age. There are going to be other names who come about, whether they're dual nationals, whether they're players playing in the Canadian Premier League or academies across this country, but certainly there's a core group of players in their early 20s. They need to be unleashed, and Marsch needs to figure out as soon as possible what he has, because this is going to be the core group that inevitably pushes his team forward, along with the likes of the star players of Davies when he can come back in, Jonathan David, and the other premier players in this Canadian men's national team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that, Ollie?
I agree with the sentiment there generally, I think, in that we can talk about Marsch and tactics and the way they're going to play. And I think that's important. But like the single biggest factor for me between now and the next World Cup is how can you improve the players at your disposal, right? Both the ones who are already kind of established and then who is going to come into the group over the next 4 years. Because when we exited the last World Cup, you probably didn't have much of an idea who was going to play at centre-back going forwards for Canada. Moise Bombite hadn't been drafted yet. Derek Cornelius was kind of an extra a lot of the time through that World Cup qualifying run. Luc Defougerolles obviously was very young and not on the radar really at all. So these players can emerge. And I think that's kind of, for me, top of the list, again, of all the things you can talk about, is how do we improve the caliber of the playing squad? So that's new players coming in, but it's also, I look at some of the names that Wheels mentions, and yes, can Marsch help to push them along with the national team? But if I was him, I'd also be saying to these players, how many of you can really push your career at the club level as well? You know, when I look at even an established player like Alistair Johnston, can you go to the next level? Nico Seeger, Luc Defougerolles, Ali Ahmed, Nathan Saliba, Promise Davids. Like, I think there's players here who you would like to see really try and push to, I don't want to sound too much like John Herdman here, but to try and get into those top 5 leagues. Because when you look at the teams in the quarterfinals of this World Cup that are really able to go deep in this World Cup, not saying that we're immediately going to get there as Canada, but these are the leagues that these players are playing in. Europe continues, I think, to dominate this competition, both in terms of its national teams and also the players playing for countries outside of Europe where they're playing their club football. So that's where I'd put the focus on. I do think there's a period over the next 12 months or so to really experiment with the schedule. And then you try and build from there, I think, towards hopefully a Copa America in 2028 and the World Cup in 2030. But for me, it's the players who have to be at the center of this.
Yeah, I mean, you guys covered most of it there. There's not much left for me to say. I'd just say that the significant dates that are coming up give opportunities for experimentation for a reason. And I will say that, and Gareth went through a lot of names there. I agree with some of them. I'm not quite sure some of them are good enough right now. And you have to argue, is that down to Jesse Marsch to make them better? Is it down to them to get better at their club, which is what Oliver was talking a little bit about? I just don't know whether the word is significant changes is what we're going to see. I think 17 of the 26 players in this World Cup squad were between 22 and 28. I think a lot of them are going to be around. And, you've just got to find opportunities for some of those players that Gareth mentioned to get them into Canada's team and find out what they're about. We can get into more questions about other things and style. And I think that's actually there's more questions around that and what Jesse Marsch is going to create Canada to look like than some of the personnel. And it's obvious that every time a tournament ends, there's a new cycle. We saw it even coming out of Copa America. You haven't seen much of Luke de Fougerolles until the Uruguay game. Nathan Saliba had never played for Canada after that. Ali Ahmed really got his first start there, in opportunities to do that. And that was only 2 years ago. So there are players that can go on and kick on. But I also want to make sure, a caveat, that this is not a rebuilding time for Canada, and then suddenly they can get away with saying they're no longer competing for major continental trophies because they're going through a rebuilding phase. You can maybe do one or the other. You can't necessarily do both at the same time if you're going to go full in on both. And I think it's just taking the pressure off this organization a little bit by saying, let's scrap it all up, let's have a full rebuild, let's bring all these players in, when I think a lot of Canadians now want to kick on and go, no, it's time to win a trophy.
Well, and that's exactly it, Christian, because what's next is Nations League. And I find that even if it was after Herdman, even after World Cup 2022, it was always like, okay, you make steps on that global stage, but at the end of the day, we want a trophy. The men's program hasn't won one since 2000, even though you're still understanding that you've got to bring in new players, young players, and get them integrated into the system. So what do you do? Like, what do you think the approach should be then for Jesse Marsch with that next big tournament where a trophy is on the line?
I mean, I would start by saying that Jesse Marsch has got a lot of thinking to do right now in terms of how does he get more goals from his team. And, the reflective phase at the World Cup is over. We've all done it. We've all told that story and we've all loved it, right? Their achievement and their outcome in this tournament, no one's going to say that it was a disappointment. It has been, I think, far exceeded a lot of people's expectations. However, this is now an ambitious football/soccer country that requires progress. And I think with that comes the coach and the ability to turn this program around and make them more of an attacking unit and less predictable on the field. And that comes down to a few things that we've seen for a long time. If Canada go behind, they never really ever look like coming back. Yes, they did it against Iceland. They got 2 penalties. Yes, they did it against Uruguay. But in a big competitive game, you think about the times they've been knocked down and they don't come back. And I think that comes down to mentality. And they speak a lot. They talk the talk. We want to be the big, hot, most difficult team to play against in the world. We don't fear anybody. They talk the talk. Can they walk the walk? Do they actually feel like they enjoy the pressure of what is top-class international football? Because at times during the World Cup, and only they lived it, only they know, it did look labored, it did look heavy, it did look like that a lot of pressure was on their shoulders. And with this team, it's time to free them up and get the best out of their attacking players and score goals and look like a team that's going to demand to win games from the start.
Yeah, this has to be the number one focus is what they do with the ball. I think they've defended pretty well at this tournament by and large. It's clearly the in-possession stuff that needs to move on. And, I said this on a previous show. I think Jesse Marsch at times can come across as quite defensive when he's questioned on those types of things. I hope he can kind of let that down a little bit to really analyze where his team is at in terms of how they use the ball and how they can get better. And I think there's plenty you can do. You can talk about tactically, but I think beyond that, can you hire a coach who's going to help you in that side of the game? You have a set piece coach. Why not an in-possession coach who can really specialize to help the team get to the next level in that regards? You've got some time here. I do agree that we want to win a continental title and we want to, there's a certain degree of pressure to do that. But you do have some runway here for a little bit of experimentation. And some of the things that you don't see Canada do at tournaments I think you don't see them because they've never been tried before, right? We've never really tried three in midfield. We've never really tried Jonathan Davids playing higher up as a number 9. We've never really tried, I don't know, Tajon Buchanan switching to the left-hand side to give you a right-footed player coming in off the left and seeing what he can do in that position. It's usually kind of the same formula repeatedly, and I think that's become quite predictable and quite stale. So there's opportunity to do that. And then the other thing, and I'll give him a little bit of credit on this front, is the fitness and form of players. You know, that's not entirely in Jesse Marsch's control. Jonathan David, Tani Oluwaseyi didn't come into this World Cup in great club form off the back of the seasons that they'd had. Alphonso Davies, Promise Davids, Ismail Kone gets injured, Schaffelberg, Flores, even Ali Ahmed, you know, didn't seem to come into the tournament obviously fully healthy and ready to go. So that's an area where you think there could be some improvement just on the basis of circumstances. But this is something I think they really need to take an honest look at and kind of have the humility, I'd say, to be able to take a look at it and not kind of put up the walls that I think get put up sometimes when they're asked questions about this side of the game.
I'm glad you brought that up. The entire country knows getting to a final 16 of the World Cup is something special. But at the same time, I feel like I didn't really learn much about this team over the course of the World Cup, whether it's because of fitness issues with players coming in, whether it's because of the opponents that they played. Like the next World Cup, it comes around, they're not going to be in Pot A. Like that provided them a path where they played Bosnia, a team that they drew, and they beat, a Qatar team that went down to 9 men who weren't very good anyways, and South Africa. And I'm not trying to diminish their accomplishment. They got the job done. And by the metrics, also in terms of expected goals against, Canada's been one of the best performing teams in the tournament. I mean, they had about 5 XG against Qatar, which kind of portrays maybe a little bit of a story. And that's my concern, is that people will point to things like the data that was shown and the final 16 and just kind of give the team a complete pass based upon the way that they're playing and how to take things forward from here. Like, I just don't know how much we learned. So I think that Ollie and KJ bring up a lot of good points. I will just say, like, showing a little bit more flexibility in the way you play. It doesn't need to be a ton. Like, we all know how Jesse Marsch wants his team to play, and I think it can be effective at times, but I would prefer to see them play more like a Red Bull 2.0 than Red Bull 1.0. And a lot of the time it looked more like 1.0, like Ralph Rangnick style, not the Jurgen Klopp style of play. And some of the positioning, like the Jonathan David question, is one that's going to persist. Like, where's, he's your best attacking player, your record goal scorer, where best to play him moving forward as well. So there's plenty of questions like from that side of things, but I just think that there's going to be an evolution at play here. And I don't think that we should just say, red of 16, everything's great. No, like, this team still has room to grow. And I think that's a real positive, that we all believe that there is room to grow for this team and this program moving forward as well.
Yeah, and moving forward, we also know that Jesse Marsch has a new 4-year deal. And when Kevin Blue, after the World Cup, was asked about his key performance indicators for Jesse Marsch, how is he measuring success here for his coach? He admitted that he didn't have any specifics, at least not at the moment here, Ollie, but that doesn't mean we can't have our own KPIs here for Jesse Marsch the next 4 years. What are some indicators you're looking at and you would like to see him reach?
Yeah, well, there's plenty to choose from, right? And I think the Copa America is a big one. Are they in that tournament or not? I think is going to be quite defining in terms of maybe how they approach some other tournaments. Because you do have to be realistic here to a certain extent. We'd all love to win a CONCACAF title, but are you going to go for the 2027 Gold Cup, the 2028 Copa America, and the 2029 Gold Cup? You got to give these players a summer off at some point. So I think if you're in the Copa America, you're in Nations League, they'll try to qualify for the Olympics as well. I think that's a bit of a long shot, to be honest. But maybe if they're in all of those competitions, the Gold Cup becomes a bit more of an opportunity to take a look at some different players, as the US often does, and give them that tournament experience. But I think those are going to be kind of the hallmarks of it. Try to win a continental trophy in your own region, kind of less tangibly, I guess, but are we seeing progress in the team from the 2026 World Cup as we work towards 2030? Are we seeing some meaningful steps forwards? And then obviously World Cup qualifying. We got to make sure we get there, and are we taking care of that as expected? I think those would probably be the three that come to mind for me as the primary objectives for Jesse Marsch over the next 4 years. Obviously then ultimately leading to the World Cup performance that you want to see.
I'll let Oliver Platt play human resources here and provide the KPIs, the key performance indicators. But I'll just say that I didn't like that comment from Kevin Blue. Like previous regimes, the head coach, there's always analysis, whether it's on the men's and the women's team after major tournaments. There's clear expectations. There has to be within or any organization in order for people to be aware of what's expected of them. Blue made the comment like, I'm backing them no matter what. Well, what does that mean? Like, I just think that everyone needs to be held accountable for the job that they do. And I get it that Canada Soccer, their biggest liability on just their expenses has always been that the head coaches of the national teams. And now that donors have now come in and are paying the majority of his salary, that shouldn't be a reason why to keep a manager in their job. I'm not advocating getting rid of Jesse Marsch, by the way. Like he's done a fine job. He's going to take the team forward. There's going to be continuity. I think that's going to be a good thing. But there has to be some basis by which you're going to gauge him. And if Blue isn't capable because he doesn't know the game, then others around him have to make up that slack. There has to be internal accountability. It just can't be a manager just doing whatever he wants. That makes very little sense. I feel like we've gone into these awkward positions before in Canadian soccer. So I didn't like that comment. It really surprised me, to be honest with you. There should be a thorough review about how the World Cup played out, the good, the bad, and everything in between. That's just standard practice. And the fact it doesn't sound like the man leading Canadian soccer is that's not the way he wants to operate is a little bit surprising to me.
When you talk about KPIs, as you guys have done, for me, the number one KPI on Jesse Marsch starts with his players. What do the players think of him? And are the players now asking him to take them to another level and develop particularly their style of play with the ball? There continues to be question marks, particularly against teams that are deeper against them, that are difficult to break down, that have not been able to be broken down under Jesse Marsch. And a lot of games in friendlies that come to Canada or in games within their region that they're going to play, aside from the US and Mexico, are going to look a lot like that. So players are going to ask their coach, because players by nature are genuinely selfish, how do you get the best out of me? And that's very important going forward. And it starts with their best attacking player and arguably one of their greatest attacking players ever in Jonathan David, who may well struggle at club level, but needs to be given more of a leader role on this team from an attacking prowess talisman point of view. For some reason, it's just disappeared. He scored in 11 in the first 22 games under Jesse Marsch. Great record international football, Copa America opponents, France, the Dutch, you name it, tough opponents. He's disappeared. He's scored in only 2 of the last 14 games, and they need to find a way to get the best out of him. No team made more crosses per game in this World Cup than Canada. No team out of 48, and the service was not good. So it comes to lots of experimentation. Modern day football, we're watching Morgan Rogers play as a 10, then sometimes go out wide. Michael Elise, arguably one of the best players in world football, play as a 10, then sometimes go out wide. That is not the 10 that Jonathan David is playing. Why can't Tajon Buchanan play there? I'd like to see Tajon Buchanan try that role for 60 minutes in a friendly game against, I don't care, right? Play Jonathan David and Tajon Buchanan. Have Flores on the left and Ahmed on the right. Try things. And I think that are some of the KPIs that come to mind for me is attacking football, dominating the games, starting well, being up, leading the game, and not being so predictable. All things that Jesse Marsch has the capability of doing, but as a nation, we are absolutely allowed to ask and require that going forward.
Well, just really quickly, Andy, we haven't even mentioned Alphonso Davies in this as well, right? 15 months, he's played about 15 minutes for Canada. That's another massive KPI, if you want to call it that, is his reintegration into this team as well.
And when will that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I don't mind a little bit of a blender too, because that's right. That's what keeps your opponents on their toes. And I think that's something we've all been clamoring to see here from Jesse Marsch. All right, KJ, enjoy the match tomorrow. But first, vamos a la playa. You promised you were going to do that. Bring back some sand for me. Christian Jack in LA is going to be taking in that Spain-Belgium game. And speaking of other KPIs, I mean, we know Jesse Marsch is going to be at least involved somewhat in this CONCACAF Under-20 Championship. The Canadians playing in this one. This also acts as a qualifier for the Olympics. So their first game will be July 26, 4 p.m. ET. They will take on Panama.